Annenberg Media.
War Berlin für mich ein Traum. Es war eine Großstadt, da gab es was zu entdecken. Es waren abends viele Lichter.
For me, Berlin was a dream. It was a city. There were places to explore. There were many lights at night. I could go shopping. I could meet other young people. And that was the reason I returned to Berlin.
Kleine Tasche, mich entschlossen nach Berlin.
Ich bin geboren worden, ganz weit weg von hier, in so einem kleinen Ort, aber es war klar, ich will immer nach Berlin. In Berlin findet das eigentliche Leben.
I was born a long way from here in a tiny place, but I was sure I was headed for Berlin. Life revolves around Berlin.
Down in the moving, in the making, in change, so to say. It never took a definite form. After the World War I, it was Berlin of the so-called Weimar Republic. That is the first Republican Berlin. Very exciting, but difficult to live in town. Half civil war, half eccentric nightlife, half intellectual chattering all around. Then came Hitler's Berlin. It was a town occupied by the Nazis, a kind of strange alien power.
Hitler had grandiose ideas for Berlin. He wanted architecture that would express the power of the Third Reich, and he planned to tear down and rebuild large areas of the city.
It is amazing to imagine.
But instead of Germania, the Second World War brought destruction to the city, and after the end of the war, Berlin was divided into sectors: the British, French, and Americans in the west, and the Russians in the east.
It was always a divided city. There were always two parts, an eastern and western part of Berlin, a rich and a poor party. This is true for many capitals, Paris, London. But in Germany, it takes a particular significance because the east, from the middle of Berlin, goes to Moscow. And the west, from the middle from Berlin, goes to London and Paris. So it is a meeting point, it's always said, of the Western European world and tradition and what comes east. In Berlin, they met.
In 1961, the city was physically divided when the East German government erected the Berlin Wall, providing a powerfully graphic symbol for the Cold War, which divided the whole of Europe. Uli and Christiane Damrosa have spent all of their lives in East Berlin.
Looked at from today's perspective, I would say it was drab, but in those days we considered it to be the norm. But we lived, and we lived well. We had no concerns about our livelihood, and also no welfare worries and such like. We had a reasonably good existence, perhaps somewhat hemmed in.
I view it in the same way, feeling perhaps that something was missing. But it was never true that every moment was depressing.
The fall of the wall affected the two Domroses quite differently. Christiane was no longer able to work on costumes and scenery for the subsidized theaters of East Berlin because the subsidies were withdrawn. But Uli's collection of East German photographs generated worldwide interest. New opportunities opened up which saw him organizing exhibitions in New York. He also found a job at a prestigious museum in West Berlin. After the war, West Berlin became an island of capitalism within communist East Germany, a thriving 24-hour city heavily subsidized by the West, an outpost in the East in the front line of the global Cold War. By contrast, East Berlin was fully integrated into the East German state as capital city, the home of government and state power.
Berlin was the cultural place for which you yearned if you were an artist or if you wanted to succeed. At a political level also, everything happened there. There were certain other places like Dresden and Leipzig, but Berlin was without doubt the liveliest and the center for everything. There were a great number of contacts with the West. These naturally occurred mainly in Berlin.
Berlin was the capital city of the GDR, and because of that, it was of great importance to the whole state. Everyone was attracted to Berlin, wanting to partake in certain cultural experiences. Or one simply wanted to be able to go shopping, because Berlin was the showcase of the GDR, and all the consumer goods were channeled there. Therefore, there was more to be had there than in any other town.
Berlin had such a central function that it was, as it were, a gateway to the world outside. Even if the wall was there, it was full of holes. You could speak to people, to journalists and visitors from the West.
Wir haben dann auch versucht, einzelne Leute 86 einen Piratensender zu machen.
We set up a pirate radio station in 1986 with friends from West Berlin. We wrote the scripts and the West Berliners produced and transmitted the programs until this was killed off by jamming from the East.
Die Sachen dann gesendet.
In reality, every day we met with the West. The West German news was seen by many people. Only very strict party members denied themselves the news for ideological reasons. My parents watched it and later we also joined them. But those who were interested in films and went to the cinema and read books, they were trying to inhale the West. They must have formed an idea what Western society was all about.
The cracks in the global politics of the Cold War found a strong local expression in the growing oppositional politics of East Berlin. It was increasingly difficult for the East German regime to maintain its hold on power.
The
result was that people turned to the opposition party. Various people came to the conclusion that they could no longer live like this. They didn't want to go on like this. The opposition in the GDR was created from various groups, from human rights and ecological movements. Later, the women's movement also contributed, and it did not appear as an obvious opposition, but more single groupings suing for legal rights.
Als Gruppierungen, die auf den einzelnen Sektoren mehr Rechte, mehr Freiheiten.
Ja, ich war regierender Bürgermeister von Berlin, genau gesagt von Berlin West.
I was mayor of Berlin, or to be exact, West Berlin. From the end of the summer, we were actually already prepared for something to happen, that a storm would erupt, as we say, from behind the wall. But of course, we didn't know when it would erupt and how it would break.
For 28 years, the Berlin Wall has divided Germany. Last night, the East German government threw open all the border crossings. For more than 16 hours now, East Berliners have been streaming back and forth through the wall, taking what for many is their first look at the West. The East German government has brought in many reforms in the past week, but nothing like this.
Aber wir waren, wenn man so will, relativ gut vorbereitet.
Taking our expectations into consideration, we were relatively well prepared. And on the night of the 9th November, I drove to the TV studios and commented on the events for the Berlin Evening News. And I said to all who want to come over, you're very welcome, but please use public transport and leave your Trabis and Wartburgs at home.
That day was somewhat strange. Even the previous evening, before you heard the announcement, you couldn't really believe it and take it in. Enormous queues formed outside the police registry office. People wanted to acquire some kind of passport. But we actually went to bed as normal. I must admit that I had a real fear of coming into contact with the West. I was not that interested. I first took a few steps over the demarcation line into the bad West, with Uli holding my hand.
Hand in Hand in den bösen Westen. Uli kannte das ja schon alles ein bisschen länger.
Uli had already been there and knew what was going on, but after that it got easier. And now I travel as normal around the whole of Berlin. But at the beginning it was very strange.
Aber am Anfang war es schon, ja, irgendwie merkwürdig.
The fall of the wall brought challenges for West Berliners too. Michael Schonauer had mixed feelings. Like Christian Damrosa in East Berlin, he was affected by the withdrawal of subsidies for the cultural industries and lost his job, while his partner, Sabine Gartelbrugger, found it increasingly difficult to make a living from her small snack bar.
I'd had a disturbed night, and no way did I expect this. I was lying in bed and saw it on TV and felt partly joy, partly apprehension for what was going to happen. I didn't know what to think. I felt both joy and a kind of sadness. I was moved to tears. The opening of the wall was like that for me.
My experience was similar to Michael's. I remained passive because I was uncertain what was really happening. I more or less experienced it only through the television, and it was days later before I actually got involved in the euphoria.
It was my birthday, the day they all came over to Berlin, everyone from the East. They all came to the wall and celebrated. I, however, concentrated more on my birthday. I saw it on the TV and in the evening went out, but only locally. There were the people celebrating in the pubs and everything was going on.
The fall of the wall did more than just reunite Berlin. Its message echoed right around the world.
I
think that the fall of the wall has already influenced world politics, and generally the fall of the Iron Curtain and changing borders within Europe. It has had considerable influence on world thought. Basically, the whole world seemed almost to fall apart.
But as people came together from East and West Berlin, it became apparent that the different historical experiences of Ossis and Wessis did not make for immediate harmony.
I believe the East German people have been living in a different social dimension. Their attitude to one another, their solidarity has been different. They helped one another and supported one another as there was little to be had. It was loyalty to each other. One bartered, one wanted this, someone else wanted that. Not everything was bought because there was nothing much to buy. When people live like that, it's much more likely to result in them sticking together, whereas we look out for ourselves. We are concerned with status. It's a totally different way of life.
The Wessis regard the Ossis as some kind of new East Frisians, whereas earlier there were jokes about East Frisians, like in America they make jokes about the people from Nevada. Now it's not the East Frisians, instead it's the turn of the East Germans. You hear things like they are lazy, stupid, they're not the same as in the West. They in turn say that the Westerner is a big mouth, He always knows better, he always maintains that he's a bit smarter. Looked at from a social angle, I would say that at the moment the Westerner is in a much worse state than the Easterner, because the Easterner can juggle the situation better.
I always get the feeling that there are two different time zones. One lies 30 years in the past and the other 30 years in the future, and they are moving towards each other. In a few years, we will maybe reach the same era.
There are differences in our mentalities. There have been differing experiences in the East and the West. These have molded our characters and outlook on life. And I already think I can clearly sense it with my Western colleagues, and I sense it in myself with the Easterners, that there is something that will keep us apart for a long time.
These differences of culture and thinking may already be losing their significance for younger people, for whom unification is increasingly being taken for granted.
At the beginning, I thought I would always find the differences obvious, but now things have already become muddled. Many Easterners now live in West Berlin. Also, Westerners have located to the east. It's no longer noticeable. You can't tell the difference anymore.
I believe that I can't distinguish anymore between Easterners and Westerners, not those of my age anyway. One has just started in my class. She's from the West, and there's no difference between us. None.
I think young people, in the beginning, when the wall came down, everyone was really curious, you know, what's happening in the other part of Berlin. And so the West Berliners rushed to the east and had a look in the clubs and the pubs. And it was quite a friendly atmosphere, and yeah, people talking to each other, how was it for you, you know, what have you been doing the last 20 years? And then, I mean, who knows why, but, you know, Westerners paying taxes for the Easterners and Easterners getting unemployed and all that, so the atmosphere changed.
For many local residents, the downside of change was significant. Opening the boundaries has dramatically increased traffic pressures in what, to the west at least, appeared to be a green city.
The rush hour used to last from 3 to 5 o'clock. Nowadays, the rush hour stretches from 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 or 10 in the evening. The number of jobs has dwindled despite the many building sites. Berlin's cultural projects have been cut back dramatically. I was a victim of this. I lost my job that way. All the money is being spent in the east for building roads, homes, and large official buildings for politicians. With the dramatic collapse of industry in East Germany, unemployment is enormous, and the future for some of the people is not encouraging. And for the East Germans, it's like a cultural revolution in the Maoist sense. Everything in society has changed for these peoples. The economic structure, the political and social structures, the rule of law.
With these changes, and in particular the increased economic problems, came some unpleasant echoes of the past.
I know how shocked I was in the spring of 1989. I was having a beer with a friend of mine not far from here in a cafe, and a man approached and suddenly threw up his arm and shouted "Heil Hitler," and then walked on. And that hit me like a blow in the stomach.
Every day you hear from people that somebody was attacked in the subway, and passengers looked away or didn't do anything, or, you know, this has become a daily reality even in Berlin.
West Berlin's position after the war as a prosperous Western enclave within East Germany made it a focus for Turkish migration, so that by the 1980s there was a well-established Turkish community within the city. Turkish people have been particularly targeted by the new racists. Mehmet and Ayhan play for the Turkumsport football club. They used to play matches only in West Berlin, but they're now part of a regional league, which means they visit clubs in the former East Germany, too.
Also wir sind ja vor 4-5 Wochen About 4 or 5 weeks ago, we went to the east again, to Eisenhüttenstadt, and there was a TV crew there as well who asked me before the start of play, what's it like? Have you got used to it, and how does it all work out? In one sense, we've got used to it, and it's nothing new for the fans to say, foreigners get out. But when you're standing there with those people, you know, you're not used to it yet. Then it does hurt. It starts perhaps with 1 or 2 people, and then after a time, the whole stadium is at it. And when you see the faces of the people and the hate that's in those people, then what can I say?
Much of the cause lies in the economic situation, this unemployment in particular. Many people blame it on the foreigners, I think. I find that very wrong, and I believe that at some point they'll realize that it's not just you, and the blame doesn't lie with the foreigners. They have to acknowledge us as fellow creatures, and I think this will happen.
I've lived in Berlin for 24 years, and of course I can remember what it was like before. It was better before, but after the wall fell, the xenophobia re-emerged. I found it better before the wall fell.
But there are many Germans who want to demonstrate their disapproval of such nationalistic feelings. This rally and many others have been held in support of Germany's foreign population.
I'm convinced Berlin will become a multicultural city, because everything is represented here. You can find Chinese fare, Turkish, all manner of international dishes. You can become acquainted with all nationalities before you go on holiday. And that's the nice thing about Berlin. You can go out at nights and meet all sorts of people. I think that Berlin will become a multicultural city eventually, but you can't predict when.
Berlin is now united again and is replacing Bonn as the capital of united Germany. Its residents and politicians have begun to try to redefine the city's role in the new post-Cold War world, recognizing that the future of Berlin will depend on its position within a global system. They hope that Berlin will become a world city at the center of a new Europe, which stretches from the Atlantic to the Urals. But some fear that it may become marginalized on the edge of a powerful Western European economic bloc.
Because of its territorial position bordering on the east, its proximity to the countries in the east, Berlin has regained its exceptional position. That's true. There's no doubt that many contacts with countries in Eastern Europe, which have traditionally come to this country, to East Berlin, will all continue. And Berlin, due to its capital status as capital city of the German Federal Republic, will achieve even more.
Berlin has certainly become global and politically important now that it is the capital city, and it will continue to gain more influence than our little Bonn. It was always the most easterly city in the west and the most westerly city in the east. When the Russians and the Poles, or the citizens from the Baltic states, looked to the west, they regarded Berlin as the first stop, and only then did they go on to Paris and London. And vice versa. Berlin was always for many from Western Europe the place behind which stood St. Petersburg or Moscow. And I think Berlin will again play this role, and I would naturally wish it for the city. And I believe that not only has this city something to offer the Germans, it could have a meaningful and real part to play for all Europeans.
Annenberg Media. For information about this and other Annenberg Media programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.